So good morning, all of you. Still waiting for many students to join in, but we want to start. Test number 3 is what we have attempted. We are not very regular with our test writing, and I always advise you to at least attempt it. If you're not submitting it for evaluation, that is a wrong decision that you take. But anyhow, do attempt the writing practice by at least trying to frame out the answer to the asked question. And once you frame that out and you get the model answer to the same, try to integrate. This is how you develop the content building. The first two tests of paper 1 that you have attempted earlier were about the static part. It is very difficult for us to draw a clear boundary line, I do understand, but then we tried to divide our syllabus like this because proceeding with more than 10 tests was not possible with the limited time that we are having before attempting our 2020 main. So the static part with physical geography and human geography is what you attempted. Here in this particular test, dynamic part was emphasized on, and dynamic part cannot be, any answer on dynamic part cannot be initiated without writing something that is derived from static part. Like randomly, before I get onto the screen share, I asked a question about the challenges to the soil. So automatically you must start your answer with what can be called as a static part of soil. Soil ultimately is what? Topmost layer of lithosphere. A line, 2 lines, 30 words, a small paragraph. It is all dependent on which type of question you are encountered with. I'm writing answer on climate change. I need to start up my answer saying climate change is a natural phenomena that has been accelerated, has been diversified of its causes because of human activity. That is how you try to create out the information and convincing information, because all of us write answer, but why some of us get very good marks and some of us fail to attain so? It is only because I'm not presenting the content in right manner, or I'm not covering the required content altogether. So that is the reason, apart from giving you writing practice in terms of 8 questions per question paper, I'm also giving you a model answer, and I'm insisting that every model answer we are having as many diagrams as possible. You must have noticed I have already mailed you the third model answer. There have been plenty full diagrams drawn, and every diagram I draw myself just to inject the confidence among you that yes, it is manageable and you can draw it with your absolute free hand. I hardly use scale and etc. while drawing the diagrams, because that is the way you have to present it in examination. You certainly cannot have the luxury of scale, eraser, color, and etc. You have to be very swift in drawing the diagrams. And it should not be coming up as something burden. It is integral part. And before I take anything further, because I want to speak more specific about it, I want to get to the screen share, quickly talking about what was the question and what we were supposed to write about it. And you have attempted it. Some of you have sent it to me. Some of you are still not sending. We are having few students in the waiting room. Please give me a minute. Rahul. We have got a student in the class with the name of her gadget. Please switch on your camera. Redmi K20. Drop in your name. Otherwise, I have to remove you from the class. The name that is registered with us, and please switch on your cameras. If you don't switch on your cameras, it is difficult for me to recognize you. I see few of you in my panel, and I do keep changing the panel. Yes, what is your name? Redmi K20. Drop in your name, type it and drop it as chat. Quick, I'm waiting for your name. Okay, you are Yamuna. You should always enter the class with the name with which you are registered with us. And I always request be there 5-6 minutes prior to the beginning of discussion, so that you don't waste time of other students who are quite on time, punctual candidates. Okay, getting onto the screen share. I have talked about the introductory account already. I'm getting onto the screen share now. And as always advised, when you are after this discussion, the video will be uploaded on your portal. That is possibly the reason that we become quite ignorant about the time of the discussion and all. But when we are having it, it is the best face-to-face that we can have in the present COVID. And when we are with face-to-face kind of an orientation, it is much more fulfilling. That is what I believe in. Otherwise, I would have easily recorded the discussion and would have uploaded on your portal without disturbing you. But that is always advisable that you are here in the class. Anyhow, quickly getting on to the questions that we attempted. Model answers have been mailed to you. It is not mailed, it is on your portal. So you have to actually see it from your portal. And please have a reading of it if you have yet not done it. After I complete my discussion, don't delay it for tomorrow, because you will then be preparing for your 2 upcoming comprehensive tests for paper 1. And all these 3 tests, that is test 1, 2, and third one that I'm all set to talk about right now, is going to give you quite substantive upper edge in attempting your comprehensive test. So without wasting much time, short length question, question number 1, compulsory question. Write note on causes of sea level changes. Start with the general fluctuations that is applicable to sea level always. So you give a line or 2 to justify it. And then we have taken a changeover to write sea level changes for a variety of reason. And these variety of reason, remember, sea level changes includes natural as well as human induced reason. If I don't read word by word in my model answer. So variety of reasons, I have got eustatic, I have got isostatic, and parallel to it, what has been included as a swift line diagram. On the time scale, I'm ranging from few hours to centuries, and I'm taking the reference of sea level rise with variable demarcation, swells, sea waves, storm surges, wind waves, seasonal cycle, intra-annual variability as El Nino southern oscillation. And same goes with local to global. Because when it is global, then we take the reference of the term mean sea level. See how easily this very simple line diagram have given examiner the understanding that sea level changes can be applied on both time and space scale. Here is space scale. And I have given examiner the different types of sea level changes, and that is where my answer automatically get an excellent beginning. And then every one of us will write, this is something which is very commonly talked about. So eustatic change, isostatic change. And then there is a tectonic uplift or depression, which is by default there. And then we have added global warming. And in place of again giving more space to writing, it's a diagram that we have taken. Causes of sea level changes incorporate terrestrial water storage, extraction of groundwater, changes in runoff, seepage into the aquifers. These all are examples of what? Human-induced factor. It is subsidence in the river delta because of the variations in the discharge. Surface and deep water circulation modified by ocean warming. An exchange of water stored on land by glacier. You can supplement it with a technical term, ablation. Ablation is the melting process of ice. You apply it, you automatically are taking up the reference of 2 diagrams. One is talking about how many types of sea level changes you can take into reference in terms of time, in terms of space. Another diagram which is combining natural as well as human induced factor. Because if I just ask you to see this, I have just zoomed it out, tectonic displacement, then it is automatically natural. So eustatic, isostatic, tectonic, and then global warming, I don't have to tell you, that has to go with human activity, and you take up the reference. I've already given you that in the slide. And the example that is coming up with the reference of 3.6 millimeter per year from 2006 to 2015 is assessed from IPCC. We are aware of the fact that the most important reason, among the most important reason of the rise in the mean sea level after thermal expansion of oceans, ocean water, IPCC says up to 90% of heat added to the climate system by human activity is absorbed by oceans. So thermal expansion, and combined with thermal expansion, we also identify the factor that is related to ablation, melt of ice. A latecomer is here, just give me a minute. Part B, avail brief details of challenges faced by soil. Soil Biodiversity Atlas. Has been the reason that a new orientation of soil planning have come into forefront, and this is also confined with United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, which has talked about land degradation neutrality. But this question is straightforward, asking us to write what are the challenges faced by soil. So the soil decline, soil degradation implies to the decline of soil quality. And there are 4 types of soil degradation: physical, chemical, biological, and ecological. And you can easily take the details of it. I want to concentrate on the diagram. From extractive farming to the decline of resilience of the soil, degradation, gene pool, biodiversity, increase in erosion, loss of nutrient, decrease in use efficiency. All these results into, and I want to change the color, decline in soil and the environment quality, leading to decrease in soil utility. So what are the reasons that soil are pressurized? So reasons are correlated to extractive farming. And extractive farming leads to, you can number them, you can list them, that is absolutely your choice. Always remember, whenever I want to attain a better marks, I must give examiner the dimensions to the answer. And that is very important. And then we continue with the reference of causes and the diagram, and we apply soil degradation with the reference of 3 factors. It's very easy for us to comprehend what is written in model answer. Soil degradation process, again I am writing it as A, soil degradation factor B, and soil degradation factor C. So process is erosion, acidification, and nutrient loss. Factors are climate relief and land use, because when I talk about climate and relief, I'm essentially taking into reference wetter location. It has much higher possibility of the quantity loss of soil, relief, quantity loss of soil, but land use will result into quality loss of soil. So you can easily take the distinction between them. And activities like deforestation, extractive farming, and lack of management. So we have started our answer saying what are the factors that leads to soil degradation, and then we have taken into account what are the components that results into the soil quality in details. Like you can see in this zoomed up page, soil organic carbon and its impact on soil quality. Because when we talk about soil organic carbon, SOC, it is very important indicator of monitoring soil degradation. So dimension gets created. How we have written this answer? We have started with what is soil degradation. And then we have written what is the downward spiral. And then we have added what are the process factors and activities that leads to soil degradation. Once you take this, your answer automatically gets completely done. Way forward, conservation agriculture. Retention of crop residue, incorporation of cover crop on rotation cycle, use of combination of chemical and biofertilizer, and elimination of soil mechanization disturbances. In place of this, you can write way forward. I must always conclude my answer on a positive note. That is how it is. Part C, what is canopy heat trap? Canopy heat trap is one of the 3 heat traps identified in urban heat island concept. So elevated temperature in urban areas. There are 3 basic types of heat island: canopy, boundary, and surface. Both canopy and boundary layers heat island refers to atmospheric heating. And I want you to see this diagram. Urban canopy layer is local scale. Urban boundary layer is mesoscale. And planetary boundary level is macro scale. That means urban heat island can be studied at 3 different scales. If I write the answer on absolute urban heat island only, then I possibly have not answered this question. So you have to take the reference of the scale factor, because the question is asking us to understand what is canopy heat trap. So canopy heat trap is local level, boundary is meso level, and planetary the macro level. It is all correlated with, the causes of urban heat. This is how we take it. And this is again a very simple line diagram, you can draw it. Everyone writes this, and this is also very important. Negative heat island, it is expression city colder than their countries. With a temperate tropical semi-arid climate, mainly during mountains. And basically, when we try to mitigate, when we attempt to mitigate urban heat island, we are trying to have the practicality of urban heat sink as the concept. Because this is a natural process wherein we see that urban areas are comparatively colder than the countryside. So can we utilize it in the mitigation of urban heat island? So in place of urban heat sink, again, you can attempt your answer conclusion as a way forward. That is always advisable. Part D, impact of biotechnology on gene pool. So start your answer with what is biotechnology. And then gene pool, what is gene pool? So explaining the impact of biotechnology on gene pool, I have taken the reference of this with this contribution of Jack R. Harlan and J.M.J. DeWitt. Explain the concept of gene pool beyond its original development. They called it gene pool of a crop. You can refer it gene pool of any specimen also. You can enlarge it as a specimen, and its wild incest. So when I talk about the practical utility of the term gene pool, we identify both artificial and wild counterpart. Whether I'm talking about crop, because we have quoted these scholars, so we have essentially taken example of crop. I take crop into consideration, or I take any insect, vertebrate, reptile, any. So in place of crop, you can easily identify the term specimen also. But because these two scholars are named, so they talked about crop, so we have taken up crop. And once I take this as the definition of gene pool, then automatically, what will be the effect that biotechnology will have? So I have some bad effects, genetic pollution, and I can have a range of positive impacts. Abiotic stress, nitrogen fixation, increased productivity, value addition crop, biomass derived energy, bioremediation. So impact, if I read the question again, I have kept the printout of the question, impact of biotechnology on gene pool. Don't be pessimistic with your approach. I just want to zoom in here. After defining what is, define biotechnology and gene pool. Why we have referred scholars? Because gene pool is essentially considered to be the example where I include both natural as well as the genetically modified counterpart to it. After dealing with this, of course, focus on negative aspect of biotechnology, but never miss out on the positive aspect of it. Anything within limit Anything which is sustainable, I have asked you 2 questions on sustainability this time, is always justified. Because we certainly cannot restrict our approach of functioning with an absolute conventional track. There is a compulsion that we generate on the account of development, which is related to, which is identified with how the things is going to satisfy growing human needs. So this will be the best frame. I've emphasized on the genetic pollution and the bad effects, and with the diagram I've tried to take up the reference of positive thing as well. So you must take a balanced view, positive as well as negative. If the question would have been what are the negative effects, then you possibly would not have been emphasizing much on positive influence. Party read, discuss Meadows and phreatic zone in water resource planning. No need to emphasize. First talk about zonations of groundwater table. So Meadows zone, the zone of aeration, saturated zone, phreatic zone, shallow phreatic, deep phreatic, where I actually have got the availability of perennial water sources. So you start your answer from there, and then you have to get to the water resource planning. So if I just turn the page, in this answer I have not included the diagram because that is very commonly talked about, the utilized diagram in geomorphology. Karst topography is there, so we normally take up into reference. From here we have taken the account of groundwater is largest source of fresh water for mankind. Groundwater constitute 30% of available fresh water. Growing population coupled with intensive agriculture and increasing industrial use have led to increase in the groundwater. Water managers in many regions have to deal with over exploitation. And that is the reason we are having the threat that is correlated with the spill of the contamination toxins into groundwater. Like we are aware of industrial, agricultural, domestic effluents contaminating groundwater. So that is the reason we are taking up the reference of dealing with the pollution of the groundwater. So here we are taking the reference of 2, quality and quantity. If I just write it here like this. Quality, here it is quantity first. Quantity, because we are taking up the reference of aquifers, assessment, origin and replenishment. And here dealing with pollution, so it is quantity. So which are the 2 important measures with which we identify water resource planning when it comes to Meadows and phreatic zone? It is nothing but groundwater planning. Groundwater planning essentially incorporate both qualitative and quantitative approach. Qualitative approach is oriented towards ensuring that any sort of toxin or pollutant seepage is not terminating the quality of water. And when I talk about quantity, it is about ensuring replenishing of the extracted water resource, because groundwater is excessively pressurized. And with the changing of the climate, ever increasing demand of the population growth, industrial, agricultural have further multiplied its pressure, and it requires much defined kind of negotiative development to it. If I just zoom it up here, what should be the frame of answer? Number 1, define the zones that have been identified. What is meant by Meadows zone? What is meant by phreatic zone? Then take into reference the profile of groundwater, which we have used some 20-30 words in identifying its utility and its pressure. And then you take up the mitigation or planning strategy. Mitigation or planning strategy incorporate qualitative and quantitative. Orientation. 3-point answer is all done. You can draw the diagram showing the subsurface aquifers and etc. Very interesting question. Our topic was applicable part of geography, dynamic part. So it had to be like this. Tectonics induces dual effect on time. Modern climate system is product of long-term tectonic changes. Direct effect, indirect effect. These are the categories that we have. And most of us who have submitted the answer, I have gone through a few of them, have not exactly taken that into account. They are largely talking about this indirect effect. We have majorly focused on volcanism, introduction of gases to the atmosphere. And then you have missed out on star mark, erosion and composition of gases by chemical weathering. And direct effects like uplift, hydrological cycle, continental movement, and ocean circulation. These are also the causes that is leading to tectonic influencing climate. So tectonic induces dual effect on the climate, and that dual effect can be demarcated as direct and passive, or you can identify it to be direct and indirect effect. You can also divide your answer as positive and negative, but then it is something that is related to very long time, and then talking about positive and negative will be a difficult task. However, in the diagram, we can see weathering rate, negative effect, atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration. Surface temperature, water availability will increase weathering rate. Are you understanding it? Increase in carbon dioxide will increase the surface temperature, water availability, and will increase the weathering rate, which will induce a negative impact. And then weathering will result into atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration, temperature, negative on glacier, positive on erosion. It's a complex intermix regulated by structure plus process. And I've also included this diagram. Oceanic arc, carbon dioxide degassing. Continental arc, carbon dioxide degassing. It is the subduction boundary and volcanism. This is the subduction boundary and volcanism. Mantle, carbon dioxide degassing. We are talking about it as a ridge, or we can easily take it up as a reference of hotspot. Hotspot is marked up here. So the best way to divide, because if I say positive and negative, then there will be a repetition that will evolve. And that is what I have tried to show in this diagram. So best thing, this diagram I'm talking about. The best thing with which you can talk about how tectonics is inducing effect on climate. So it is a direct effect and it is indirect effect. That is the best thing. Direct effect is divided as per the model answer, horizontal, which incorporate latitudinal land water and longitudinal temperature anomaly and etc. factors that is related. And when I talk about the indirect effects, then we are having the major indirect effect is through introduction of gases and dust into the atmosphere. And we have concluded our answer referring global climate evolution. It is supercontinent, and there the huge amount of tectonic activities and the clash of the continents that eventually resulted into what we have seen in the diagram. The carbon dioxide, like long-lived greenhouse gases, incorporate a strong connectivity to the tectonic forces. I've already given you a framing of it. If I have to take the answer in a very conventional kind of a track, then what is tectonic, and then what is meant by the effects on climate, and then divide it, because the question is saying dual. So dual you will be writing direct, and that is the best way to. Account of global attempt to abate marine pollution. First, you have to start with marine pollution. 70% of planet, ocean acidification, trash in the ocean, ocean noise, offshore drilling. So we have started our answer with what are the causes or types of marine pollution. And then we have taken marine pollution abatement efforts. Don't restrict only to MARPOL, because MARPOL is considered to be the most prominent or comprehensive type of global attempt towards mitigating the ocean pollution. But we have got others. So it is a London Convention. I have mentioned few of them. I have mentioned MARPOL by default, but it is not just MARPOL. ACOBAM's Wadden Sea Agreement, International Convention on Regulating Whaling, because water pollution is also correlated to decrease in biotic diversity, or for that matter, eutrophication. And this is where you should attempt ACOBAM's Agreement on the Conservation of Cetaceans in Black Sea, Mediterranean Sea and contiguous Arctic Sea, or I take up Wadden Sea Agreement. If I slightly zoom it, Wadden Sea Agreement is correlated with Wadden Sea, Dutch and German part, Netherlands and German part, which is again prominently correlated with wadders, ducks, geese, and etc. So why it is so that the pollution abatement is identified to be somewhere related to pollution abatement is related to biodiversity conservation. Because when I talk about biodiversity, it is sustaining the quality of the water. So you have to actually correlate there. So what should be the framing of this answer? I'm just zooming it up and writing. I must start my answer with what are the causes or types, both the ways it is correct, of marine pollution. Never miss out on this. Even if it is a 10-marker question, then also you should start with it first. And then after dealing with it, then you are writing what? Then you are attempting the write-up of what are the conventions that are having their effectivity in the abatement of marine pollution. No denial to the fact that marine pollution, MARPOL, is the most important constituent, but it is not the only one. That is what you have to take care of. So I have got ACOBAMS, I have got MARPOL, I have got Wadden Sea Agreement. They all are London Convention. They all are significant. Multiple barriers. In the earlier test, you have attempted limits of growth. And that is where we talked about the ideal and then the extreme conditions. It is multiple barrier that limits distribution of organisms. Define barriers and briefly categorize them. So I've got physical barriers, topographical barrier, large bodies of water and land masses, impurity, lack of salinity of salt water, seawater, vegetative barrier. Climatic or ecological barrier, temperature, light, moisture. Biological barriers, food and enemies. Biological also relate to sedentary habitat and home or territorial. And a sweet diagram here, because when I say biological factor, there's a very important constituent that comes into account and which is related to social resistance, social behavior. So reproduction, settlement and development is a regulator of entry resistance. And that entry resistance results into relationship formation and social inheritance. So never restrict your answer on physical, climatological, but also add ecological, in bracket biological, factors that tends to influence what is called distribution limits of organism. Here you can, I have not mentioned that in my model answer, here you can easily take up the reference of Urey and Steno organism. Because when I take reference of URI organism, I essentially take into account the organisms that has got broader geographical range. I'm just writing range. And steno has got much smaller range. And what is the reason that I take up this small and big range? It is basically my capacity to adapt very clearly to the physical barriers. This diagram is talking about the societal barrier. Society is related to maximum of organism. This figure is related. So what are the barriers? Physical, climatological, ecological, biological, and societal. Organisms marks up their spread, but how it is influenced. A very interesting question now. Provide a detailed account of response of upper ocean to wind. If I read it on the first reference, I possibly, and some of you have gone wrong in framing your answer, I'm possibly not taking up the question very well. But you can see as your model answer is there in front of you. We are simply talking about, and I want to use this space. In this particular question, you have to talk about gyre circulation. By default, then you have to take into reference Ekman's pumping and Ekman's transport. Because they are essentially the product of, they are essentially the outcome of wind drag on the water surface. I made it easy. I have included two diagrams showing upwelling. You can see it. If there is the movement of wind, and we by default justify it to be the example in, because I'm taking deflection to my right, and Ekman's transport. So Ekman's transport away from the shoreline by default will result into upwelling. Piling up, downwelling. So Ekman's transport facilitates upwelling, downwelling. Ekman's is nothing but the effectivity of surface wind on the ocean water surface, and automatically gyre. Subpolar gyre and subtropical gyre, both of them. Subtropical gyre incorporate this type of movement and precisely is the consistent one. And if I take up the reference of the subpolar gyre, it is largely seasonal and is related to the ablation, melting of ice during summers. Like I can have Irminger and Labrador current generating the gyre circulation, which is caused by Coriolis force. So of course you should not miss out on Coriolis force. But as soon as I say Ekman's pumping and Ekman's transport, I'm essentially talking about Ekman's transport to be with the adjustment of Coriolis. Effects that correlates is the productivity, nutrient-rich water, and the weather and climate effect of the circulation that you can further add. As it is, pro and con kind of factor. If I am a cold oceanic current, I'll be developing high pressure. High pressure will be restricting onshore wind, and if it is restricting onshore wind, then will be lesser possibility of downwelling. When we are talking about the effectivity of it, it is weather and climate, thus wind pattern is influencing Ekman's transport, and Ekman's transport can influence weather and climate. So here I can use a term, and I'm purposefully using the term morphogenetic feedback relation. You can add that to your answer. Riparian area planning. Channel morphometry. Define riparian area. Land bordering stream. Morphometry is credited to Horton and Strahler. Horton emphasized on the variety of stream attributing to their drainage composition. So first order is what is the smallest in the system. Two first order confluences to become a second order. Two second order, you can see it is first and second. So two second order when confluences, they mark the development of third order. So define morphometric equations or morphometric characteristics. Start your answer saying what exactly is meant by, because we have to integrate two things together. So what exactly is riparian area, and then what exactly is meant by morphometry. Once you have done it, then you can easily take up the challenge automatically evolves in. And I want to attempt the answer as this diagram. Simple. The flow regime tends to have its influence both pros and cons with channel morphology and riparian vegetation. And if it is a riparian vegetation, mind it, it is entire riparian habitat, and I need to have the management of that. Complete demarcation comes up. So what is the feedback equation that I have to have with the riparian area and the channel morphometry? That channel morphometry is regulated by riparian area and is a regulator of riparian area. Again, writing feedback. So how it is that riparian area planning is based on channel morphometry. It is this diagram which is speaking, and you have got the details of it as the attachment in the answer. So the frame of this answer is essentially that you start with what is riparian area, then you get on to the identification of the elementary facts about morphometry, and then talk about how it is that riparian vegetation or habitat marks up its modification. Earthquake risk mitigation has improved over here. Prove it in terms of global perspective. So earthquake is unpredictable and devastating natural hazard. What makes it hazard? That it causes ground shaking, tsunami, landslide and rockfall, subsidence and lateral spreading. Brief details of lateral spreading is included. Liquefaction. And because earthquakes are extremely difficult to be predicted, the areas where high risk is can be identified in terms of frequency, intensity, duration. And it is therefore that the earthquake zoning have facilitated hazard mitigation. And hazard mitigation techniques on the page number 3 of this answer, you'll get the mitigation techniques. Prevention, protection, awareness, emergency services, structural protection. Building codes, public safety measure, acquisition of relocated structure, retrofitting of structure, protecting critical facilities, emergency operation. You know what, if you can read this, I'm just giving you a key point. After this, it should come easier. I am talking about and we all are aware of it. Globally, why we are considered to be more equipped in handling earthquake. No denial to the fact that earthquakes still remain an unpredictable hazard. But is only ground shaking the hazard that is caused by earthquake? No. It is several other factors that follows, whether it is tsunami or it is lateral spread or liquefaction, anything that you try to take up. And these factors somewhere can be justified to be predictable. So apart from prevention and mitigation, early warning, response, which comes up as a typical constituent of hazard management, we are talking about what is the reason world is much more equipped today in sustaining, minimizing, containing the risk arising from earthquake is that we are quite in par with what is called Sendai Framework 7. This is how it comes up. Moving on to the next. What are the identified causes of human impact on ecology? Human impact is largely associated with extinction of the species. Lack of adaptation for survival in changing ecosystem becomes extinct. But if the changing ecosystem is exponentially fast, then by default I justify why 99% of the species that earlier lived on the face of the earth have now been extinct. So outlining from the reference of extinction, and it is very important, that is the reason I have included that in your question. State of Earth Species Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, have identified few of the facts about extinction. I don't deny that writing all of them might be difficult, but IPBES gives us quite a dreaded scenario. At least few of them you should write. So out of approximate 5,600, I'm reading out the last. Out of approximate 5,600 critically endangered, 8,455, so round it out, 8,500 are endangered and 11,000 is vulnerable. So if I just take this and identify the status of global biodiversity, then also I'm giving examiner the understanding that it is hugely pressurized. And then you get on to this trademark, and I don't want to devote much time to it. I've added the map here. I want you to see both of them together. It is WWF priority places experiencing warming threat, where I've mentioned some of these specimens also. Amur leopard, for example, and core of the answer, hippo. Habitat loss, invasive alien specimen, pollution, population, climate change, and harvesting. CBD also recognizes hippo, but it calls it as single P. Which P is being removed? Human population. Population increase of humans is not identified by CBD. Whether it is pollution, whether it is climate change, over exploitation, briefly demarcated invasive alien specimen. If you directly get onto this answer as these are the factors that is challenging biodiversity, answer will be somewhere not complete. So you should start talking about that human impact on biodiversity is essentially triggering extinction. And we have got a massive range that is experiencing this threat. That is the reason we have taken the Intergovernmental Panel on Ecosystem and Biodiversity. All these, HIPCO. Explore the likely impact of mobilized benthic mining. What are the mining constituents? We attempted one such question earlier. And within that, I want to focus on this. Careful. The driver is need to raw material. Activity is mineral extraction. Pressure is siltation, substrate extract, disease or no release of dissolved substances, nutrient release, and noise, which results into loss of benthic fauna, change in seabed, physiological changes, primary production changes, behavior change. And it is surely going to impact regulating, provisioning, and supporting services in due course of time. The parallel written answer is all very clearly depicted with this diagram. Why do I need to have benthic mining? So need for raw material. And what exactly it is leading to? It is leading to multiple aspects. An impact of deep sea mining is being demarcated here. Impact can be demarcated as surface potential impact, water column potential impact, and seafloor potential impact. With seafloor massive sulfide, polymetallic nodules, and cobalt-rich crust. There is by default the challenges that are correlated to noise, substrate, and range of pollution. It is considered that unabated benthic mining involving the swift nod by International Seabed Authority is actually creating huge pressure on the fragile ecological setup. Because be very clear, when I come to this sea floor region, then there is many unknown, an unknown within quotes, specimen, which will go in extinction and will not be even realizing that it ever existed. And it is largely because of habitat removal, sediment plume discharge, noise, and vibration. So briefly talking about, if I just use the space here, briefly speak about what is benthic mining, then talk about which are the commercially mobilized resources, and then talk about impact. And you can easily divide impact as physiological, biological, economic, every factor that is there. Because if you don't attempt it like this, then the content will not evolve. Almost on the same line, but it is slightly different, and I'll say much more broader. What is the relation between economic geology and environment? Economic geology. Economic geology is the study of structure of relief that avails the understanding of the building material of relief. And this building material is the reason that we are having the continuous extraction of it. So mining, the extractive industry, is essentially related to economic geology. And economic geology have its relation with environment is depicted. Everything. Streaming, pumping out, treatment, precipitation, infiltration, collection, modified flow, everything. Influence. Multi-dimensional. Because everything that is related to mining, think about it, because if I take up the reference of mining that is correlated with shale gas. Shale gas is a principal reason of methane emission, mining of Arctic, environmental effect, waste generation. So we can easily take up multiple aspects that is related. So whenever it is extractive industry or economic geology, if I take reference of economic geology, I'm talking about all those geological structures that identify favorable extractable availability of resources, be it on land, be it in water. And that is the reason we have used the example of mining in Arctic. It is going to have a detrimental effect on environment. I'll give you a word of advice just in a while. Let us continue with the question because I have included two such type of question already. And you must take note of such type of questions while deciding which you want to attempt. Once I get on to the next question of this type, then I'll speak about it. So question number 4 had two questions back to back, which was oriented towards human impact. One was about human impact on mining and the other was related to human impact in the entire ecological setup. I'll talk about that question just in a while. Discuss the concept of population as social capital. OECD, sorry. Bonding, bridging, trust, safety, reciprocity, participation, citizen power, value norm, diversity, sense of belongings. Whenever I talk about social capital, we essentially talk about grouping. And that grouping is possible when we take into account identical challenges or prospects. Because until unless I have identical challenges and prospect, I'll not be, generating strong initiative of grouping the people. And if I continue with it, all the dimensions of population as social capital. Social capital is one of the many capitals with which we identify human population to be related. If human capital is not there, social capital, political capital, financial capital, built capital, natural capital, or cultural capital would not have been there. So demarcate what is social capital and then identify its diversity, its implementation diversity that we see on the map. We have already talked about bonding, bridging, and linkages. This is what is written here also. Social capital basically comprises of value in social relationship, prosperity of the company, strong company, any functioning unit. What exactly is social forestry? If I have to put it in a very crude term, so I'll write it. Mobilizing population to attain same common objectives. Aspirations. My marker got twisted, so I'm just writing common. I mobilize people to work towards fulfillment of common objectives or aspirations. So you have to actually work towards that. And in order to make people group together, there has to be the mobilization of bonding, bridges, and linkages. Getting on to part B, principal categories of rural problems. Define what is rural area in the beginning and then get on to the range of problems. rural revitalization, have given a name, and this should come up in your answer and purposefully include it. Rubanomics. Careful. It is an approach that emphasizes the linkages between rural and urban economies, like we have Pura, bridging of provisions of provisions of urban amenities in rural area. Because when we talk about rural-urban economics, it is basically going to justify, or it is basically going to control the fundamental cause of rural problem. And the fundamental cause of rural problem is unabated out migration, which is caused by non-dependable activities. And if I utilize Mark Jefferson's very basic kind of demarcation, that rural and urban settlements makes up a complementary set of constituent of a settlement system, where rural settlements are dependent on urban settlement for higher order goods and services, and urban settlements are dependent on rural settlement for the lower order goods and services. If that complementarity is given a new dynamic term, then it is called Ruabonomics. I've added this towards ending hunger and malnutrition to achieve sustainable development goal and climate goal requires adoption of Ruabonomics, transforming agri-food system to benefit both rural and urban area, scaling up of agricultural productivity, improving living conditions, and reforming agricultural governance. Then only will be in the position of fulfilling 2030 sustainable development. So what should be the frame of this question? The frame of this question's answer, because the question was a reading and I'm reading it so that I don't mess up with the term. So it is, what are the principal categories of rural problems? So principal categories of rural problem is related to climate change, resource dependency, out migration, soil exhaustion, and range of environmental challenges, which is correlated with hunger and malnourishment, etc. And then you take the reference of the mobilization of what is called which is integrative and practical. Integrative of what? Integrating both rural and urban areas together. And what is the reason that it is practical? Because it is actually taking into consideration almost every dimension that we identify to be problematic for the rural area. And while concluding, talk about sustainable development goals, automatically your answer becomes dynamic and complete enough. Explore the dimensions of energy crisis faced in the world. Start with current energy sources and detail out the fossil. The fossil fuel have got the problem of unequally distributed. I'm not reading out the details which is there. These are non-renewables. These are scarce and have enormous amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide. So energy crisis dimension 1 is that we are excessively dependent on fossil fuels, and fossil fuel incorporate these 4 challenges related. Is to diminish primacy of fossil fuel. Alternative is biofuel. with certain examples that are correlated with it. The only grain that is widely used to make ethanol is corn. Wheat, barley are also employed in this amount. Half of current production comes from Brazilian sugarcane, and the price of sugar has not risen at all, decreasing remuneration. A remunerative stand. Indian government very recently have specified the prices of ethanol, which is produced from molasses, which is produced from cane itself, so that the oil marketing companies are actually having much clarity and the cane producers are getting on the favorable edge of their produce. So if we are taking up that kind of energy prices here, so we have essentially focused on two. I can add others also, like when I talk about energy prices, we can take up the reference of other renewable as my choice. I can take up solar energy also, but that has been much talked about. So I try to avoid it and I incorporated bio energy as our example. So the category, because globally we are still massively dependent on fossil fuel, be it coal, be it crude oil. And the problem that is related to it, which is leading to the energy crisis, is the first part of the answer. And as I get to the second part of the answer, I essentially talk about that if the answer to this energy crisis is supplementing to the non-conventional renewable, then there also we have got the problem. And problem is what is the technology that is required to it, and some sort of problem that is related to remuneration that is involving these non-conventional sources. That is how we take up the reference of the answer. Part D of question number 5, waste management. Municipal solid waste. This has been asked as well. So because it is asked as world, I have given you some of the reference of the type. Like when I take the East Asia Pacific region, most of the world's weight at 23%. Middle East and North Africa is least in absolute term. However, fastest growing region are Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia and Middle East. South Asia, we are part of it. Waste generation. Have global inequality. Waste collection. If I just compare North America up to 90% is mean. Low income countries collected waste is only 48%. Waste composition, very important. It reveals the pattern of consumption. So if I have to talk about if it is a biodegradable waste, then the landfill is a good example. But even with landfill, there is the problem of methane emission. That is the reason solid waste management rule in Government of India concern Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change have talked about the green belt around the landfill center. So are you noticing that we are creating the answer in a logical sequence? We are not simply bombarding what is the waste demarcation. Solid waste development or solid waste increase has been exponential in world. However, it shows inequality. And when I talk about waste collection, it is poorer in the developing countries, which are having the bigger share of the waste generation now or is growing faster. And then the waste composition, which is actually reflecting the consumption level. And after this, you can have the reference of ways of disposal, landfill, dominant land. Landfill is 1.6 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gases, because landfill essentially generates what is called methane emissions. challenge. And local responsibility. So if I just zoom it up and talk about waste, solid waste with global inequality, solid waste with waste collection capacity or waste collection characteristics, solid waste that is largely being utilized as landfills, which is creating problem of methane emission or 1.6 billion ton as is visible in this zoomed in page also. There has been the mobilization of local participation to abate it. But this local participation to abate it is having very minimal, absolute minimal kind of impact, taking the size of waste generation. So I have not written in the answer, but I certainly want to write it here. Let me make it more thin. It becomes much more neater. Converting. I have not written that in model answer. It's a very good way forward that you can add up to your answer. From linear to circular. Economy is the best solution. Circular economy have come into major limelight because BRICS countries, writing it here, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, have essentially advocated that BRICS should be made a circular economy. Circular economy is much better and comprehensive version of the trinity of our reuse, reduce, recycle. It is like there is no waste generation at all. Linear is you use and you dispose of. Circular is that you keep on utilizing it again and again. So waste generation automatically will get reduced. Because waste is a big, big problem that is being faced on the map of world today. And the best solution is that we must work towards suggesting, developing the ways by which we are completely terminating waste generation. 0% is practically not feasible. Let it be 50%, 60% to begin with. And circular economy is a buzz term in the present perspective. And circular economy is much more comprehensive expression compared to the trinity of R. That also you can attempt here. Question number 5. Be very cautious. I don't have any answer for it. And this is the new question trend that has appeared in our question paper. So I'll just write it in front of me. I have written it right there very clearly. Answer 7A and answer 5E is almost of the same frame. Only thing that you have to take up is brief introduction of environmentalism. In last few years, we have been noticing the massive change in the nature of asked question, where examiner is trying to give me repetitive nature of question. And if I try to attempt repetitive type of question, think about this. Economic planning is reoriented towards environmentalism. This is the question here. And the other question is 7A, so I just read it out from here. That is 8C. Suggest the requirement of planning for sustainable development. Suggest the requirement for planning for sustainable development. Now you think about it yourself. If I take reference of suggest the requirement of planning for sustainable development and economic planning is reoriented towards environmentalism, is it not that we are talking about same type of content? You have to actually be cautious in such type of repetitive question because your thought process will give you a complete repeating kind of an information, and a 15 marker or a 20 marker question, here it is 10 marker and eventually it is 15 marker, it will be like you are putting at stake some 10 or 15 marker altogether, because if the absolute repetitive information will come and the examiner will not give you marks. So I've given you this note, and this note is very important for you to take into consideration. When you encounter such near repetitive question, you must choose only one. It's a very important trick that you have to follow. I'll be reading out the nature of the question as I'll reach up that question part. I continue to question number 6. Infilling migration. Is this migration? Whenever I try to see the migratory movement, which is essentially oriented towards the node, I can see that node and I have labeled it. It is from the countryside. So if I take this arrow as consideration, and it is from the peripheral area of city, if I take it as this. Infilling migration is immigration. So you must start your answer with immigration. Infilling tends to generate the gradual out migration, and then there is always the declining effectivity that comes up in terms of environmental challenge, congestion, and etc. UN Migration Agency defines migrant as the person who is moving across the international border within a state away from his habitual place of residence, regardless of legal status. Movement is voluntary, or what is the cause of movement or length of stay. The definition is there, and infilling migration is immigration. And then we take up the reference. Emerging centers, I have given you some names on this map. Characteristics of infilling migration. So mind it, you are not talking about typical migration and the concept. You are talking about the current migratory status. And then you can get on to the impact of infilling migration. Challenges, benefits. Define infilling migration. Identify trends of it. And then talk about impact as both negative as well as positive. This is the framing of this answer. Because when I'm talking about trend, then I'm noticing that it is majorly, if I just go back to the map that I have included in this particular answer, you can see that there are certain conventional centers, like I can see Seoul, I can see Singapore, I can see Shanghai, I can see Addis Ababa, Moscow, London, Chicago, Los Angeles, Buenos Aires. These are very conventional kind of a center. But then Abidjan, Johannesburg, Harare, these are the centers that have marked up their development now, Ho Chi Minh City. So there is a new development in even United States of America, Miami, Cuba, Havana. These were not the conventional centers to begin with. So I'm giving examiner the destination that is marking up its modification in the development. So framing is best like this. Geopolitical relevance of Central Asia is reviving. Mackinder, Spikeman, sea power based, and I'm simply taking up the reference of Central Asia in terms of its location, Central Asia in terms of its resource. Hydrocarbon resource is visible right here. Central Asia in terms of its ideology. Central Asia in terms of Russian interest, Chinese interest, geopolitical hotspot. Because if you take Central Asia locationally, it is a buffer between East, North, South, Southwest Asia plus Europe. If I take resource, it is hydrocarbon, crude oil, natural gas, coal, very important. Ideologically, it is extremely having a tug of war with the fundamentalist Islamic culture, because all the 5 countries of Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, is known to be much more nominal with their ideologies in spite of being Islamic dominant countries. Russian interest always there as breakaway countries of former USSR. And when I take up the reference of Russian interest, it is the pipeline networking that is a very significant case. Chinese One Belt, One Road initiative is the another important factor that is identified. All these are being written here. The dilemma, which I have talked about, the ideological conflict. China. Russia. I have mentioned Tapi pipeline also. The other players, like India, has been aggressively proposing mobilization of it. So you can take up the reference. And at the broader strategic level, we have taken up the principal foreign policy, NATO forces leaving behind Afghanistan, all are multiplying the importance of Central Asia. What is the reason Central Asia can be considered as heartland? Because Mackinder's heartland as a naturally fortified territory extending from Siberia to Volga incorporate the landlocked countries of these 5 Central Asian regions. And the way they are being a pot boiler in terms of geopolitical and economic equation, automatically there is a revival. Distinguish between the concept of growth and development. I just want to go to the diagram and it says, this is our answer. A, as a concept, development is much more broader than growth. B, in scope, it is much more multi-dimensional than growth. Mind it, development will be inclusive, sustainable. And growth is something that I have attained. I have attained this level of GDP. But this level of GDP is not reflected in terms of what is the participatory benefit to the people. Then I continue with the dimension, and that is what our answer is: term, long term, short term, measurement, both qualitative and quantitative. That I'm talking about levels of earning, and I'm also talking about quality of life and etc., which I don't do in growth. Then I have got related to, so if I attempt it as D, E, developing world and developed world, because when I talk about inclusion, so developing world is more working towards economic development and developed world is more working towards economic growth. And then we have got the demarcation F, process tenure, continuous and certain period, and G, broad effect on economy, narrow effect. Because if the development, if the growth is not inclusive, then it will not be considered as growth. And that is what has been enlarged in the answer. Overlaps with sustainable development, called sustainable ethics, is oriented towards conservation. And conservation is substantially different than preservation. conservation with as per natural limit. And this is where I'm including environmentalism. Environmentalism is that concept in geography which talks about nature determining human course of action. And if I'm planning something which is oriented towards sustainability, it has to be pro nature. That is how we demarcate it. And if I then continue, we have got the loop that has been applied here. And management of environment approaches preservative, conservative. By default, we follow conservative, which is holistic approach and monistic approach. This is how we take up the planning purview demarcation, because each one of them is significant enough for us to take into consideration. Whenever you are encountering the question which is talking about sustainability, always try to make sense with that sustainable development or sustainability is that ethics of economic planning that essentially goes with conservative, holistic approach. Because if I take monistic approach or if I take preservative approach, then somewhere I'll not be comprehensive with my account. And when we talk about monistic approach, we take it in the reference of and one more thing. Societal goals, enablers, and societal outcome. Poverty eradication, healthy ecosystem, shared prosperity. And we have integrated it with sustainability. Because whenever we talk about growth, which is inclusive, which is comprehensive, which is long-term stay, which is doing justice to the natural delicate balance, automatically it will be serving societal goals, will be facilitating a range of enablers, sustainable urbanism, green economy, capital valuation, trade, fair trade relation. That is the reason I use the term ethics. Being, belonging, becoming. Quality of life is an individual perspective, and I have given you that in the introduction, that it is correlated with how a person reflects the interaction with its personal and environmental factors with the satisfying life. And satisfying life is correlated with the possession of the things or good health or something that has been perceived by an individual is this is the type of living he or she was looking at. And then it is being domain, belonging, and becoming. And you have to talk about principles. Empowerment, comprehensive and effective treatment, personal privacy, education, leisure, digital and mobile technology, positive supportive attitude among the people who somewhere has been subjected to one or the other set of discrimination. These are called principles of quality of life. If I just want to write it here, define quality of life, identify three components of becoming, belonging, and being, and principles, which again talks about integration, well-being, bonding, dignified living. Destitutes must be contained. There must not be any sort of discrimination based on gender, based on societal hierarchy, based on what we have modified as a buzz term in our country, Divyangjan, based on the old age people, any of that sort. Principle is basically to promote equality. Equality, integration, well being, bonding, dignified living, all that factor comes up with quality of life. Because quality of life ensures, let me use it from one of the previous answers, quality of life ensures economic development. Economic growth will not essentially be related to quality of life. Whenever I increase the income level of a country, I do ensure that the levels of living of the people increases, but that is not a necessity. I need to sometime induce it. And that is how we have to take it up. Part C is very, very important. It is Sustainable Development Goal 11, and that has been given the highlighting purview on which I have framed up this question. Transforming city to be more inclusive and resilient require like never before. So why cities are important? By 2050, 70% of urban population is predicted to live in urban settlement. 70% of world population in urban areas, and urban areas are already having pressure on fresh water, sewerage, living environment, and public health. Delhi has been continuously deteriorating its air quality now, which is almost every year factor that we have taken up. So we are talking about urban growth as more dominant in coming future. And what is already there in urban areas is we are failing to maintain or abate them. So there is an evolved challenge. And it is therefore that we are having certain drivers of constructive change. So framing up for the growth, planning up the city, planning to improve impact, local leaders, what we call as grassroots administration. Because remember, every area has got some things defined as its problem, something defined as its potential. And until unless we mobilize what is called grassroots component, then it will always be a challenge. And all that factor. Urban planning, collectively held plan, broader territorial perspective, continuous generation of credibility, anticipation of cost effective purview. And then I have talked about this. In order to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 11, government policy and strategy is required to be applied. And mind it is at all the levels. And when I'm talking about pandemic like COVID, it is something that has further put it on to the factor forefront. Because urban areas, I'm still to provide the basic housing, sanitation, dignified living to the fresh immigrants to the urban location. Urban areas worldwide is identified where the poverty level, deprivation levels to be very high. And in the pandemic like conditions which we are experiencing, and all of us have noticed with different images coming from worldwide scenario, the kind of vulnerability that has been generated to the population is something that has to be contained. And that is the reason cities are required to be made more resilient and more inclusive as never before, because urban growth is going to get accelerated. And in spite of the fact that we are having less urbanization levels right now of the world, which is approximately near 45, 46%, and we are projecting it to increase to 70% by 2050. So automatically there is going to be a big, big challenge for us to generate, work towards attaining. And that is what you have to take up into as soon as I read the question, what is the bottom line that comes up in my mind will make and break my answer. As soon as I read the question which is related to cities planning and transformation, I should readily apply Sustainable Development Goal 11. If the question comes up of hunger right there in front of us, then I should talk about Sustainable Development Goal 2, abatement of hunger. These are very important things. You know, it should be very spontaneous. I should not be much working hard towards it. Define it. Acute food scarcity, which is caused by natural conditions and also human events. Poverty and hunger develops a vicious cycle. Causes of hunger we have taken up as the diagram here. So I've introduced examiner to hunger. Causes. Human induced causes. This is what I wanted to talk about. Very important. Whenever we take the reference of food crisis, only one component stands for famine. When there is complete lack of availability of food, mass starvation, and disease distribution. Otherwise, we have got different other terms that is applied. Food security, food insecurity, acute food and livelihood crisis, humanitarian emergency. So famine is one of the 5 types that is related to the language used in the food availability. So food security, when all the people have all the availability of food, sufficient, safe, nutritive food and drinking water or healthy life. Insecurity, when we have minimal availability. Acute food and livelihood crisis, when we are having acute levels of malnutrition. Humanitarian emergency, when there is severe lack of food and high increasing acute malnutrition. So you are increasing. Insecurity increases to become acute food and livelihoods crisis. It increases to become humanitarian emergency. It increases to become famine. And this is where we are taking up the reference of food waste, gender inequality, economy. Because if FAO says global food basket both quantitatively and qualitatively sufficient to feed global population, then why there is hunger? There is hunger because of inequality, and there is hunger because of uneven distribution. Critique. You have to first define what is HDI. 3 indicators. Life expectancy at birth, decent level of living, and education. And then you get to limitation. If I just put on a nutshell to it, so HDI is largely considered to be having a limiting effect, that it is essentially based on developed countries' criteria. And the conditions that I see in developing countries is far more diverse and different. Diverse plus different. So putting on the same parameter to judge up the diversity is something which is not giving us the clear purview. HDI can highlight countries with similar GNI per capita but different levels of economic development. It doesn't give us a very defined kind of a thing, but yes, comprehensive outlook it provides. I've already talked about the factor that is related to the region, developed world, factors that are more common to them. HDI is designed to consider factors like wealth, allowing multifaceted examination of global prosperity, emerging market nations. But it do provides a comprehensive. And comes in Quad. Yesterday we had Malabar exercise there, Australia as participant. Reference of Quad, provide the details of prominence of Indo-Pacific region. So we have started defining what is Indo-Pacific region. Indo-Pacific region for USA is minus China. And we all can understand that it cannot be minus China. So defining Indo-Pacific region. USA and China. Potential flashpoints, military. Major economic hub. And then others. And in others, we have taken investment cooperation, maritime connectivity cooperation, maritime digital connectivity cooperation in non-traditional security. So apart from taking the reference of the flashpoints which can be there, the trade possibilities can also be highlighted. So I'll count it as number 3. And let me go to the preceding page to give you a link. So which are the important aspects that is making prominence of Indo-Pacific region? Because when I talk about Quad, I'm actually talking about the 4 countries that are related to Indo-Pacific region. So I start by defining politically what is Indo-Pacific. Economically and strategically, it has got a different definition from different countries' perspective. I cannot have Indo-Pacific without China and India. But for United States of America, it is always to control China, that kind of purview. So what is the reason it is important? So number 1, 2, I have marked it here. And number 3, I have marked here. And these are the other avenues where we can have the possibilities of the negotiations and interest. These are all trade factors that are. Indo-Pacific economic cooperation may help reduce the differences between the countries. ASEAN centrality will be the major deriving force, because ASEAN is also working towards AFTA. And if it will be AFTA, then automatically it will include China and then Japan and then South Korea, Taiwan. And the present tug of war that is there between these two, present tug of war that is there between these two. And of course, when I take that Japan being part and parcel of Quad, we are having a sort of a point where bilateral trading equations are becoming much more stronger in determining the time-specific relation. And China, which has developed its, what we can say, career most lowest level, absolute lowest level of the global recognition and support during the present pandemic because of its all misdeeds, is actually making a Quad a very prominent bloc evolving in the Indo-Pacific region. But that certainly doesn't mean that it can work without taking into consideration China. If I have to read some of the questions which is there, because I can see few of you on a screen at a time, I'll just be changing on the cursor. If I want to read up the question, I have got the question come answer booklet in my hand. So if I read question number 8C as per your question come answer booklet, suggests the requirement of planning for sustainable development. And then I read question number 5E, economic planning is reoriented towards environmentalism. I see that the nature of question is near similar. And this is what we noticed in our 2019 main. And because of this type of repetitive question, what was happened, that the students who have not scored well is essentially because they selected both the question. If it is question 5 and 1, you don't have to select. It's a compulsory thing. But that restricts your choice. So what is the question that you are choosing in examination is also a very crucial thing towards attaining the score. As in, if I find that two questions are giving me near similar type of answer possibility, I'll not be attempting it. I'll decide on other question altogether. Because if it is something that is related to compulsory one, then I don't have much choice related to it. But I don't see any repetition in question 1 and 5. But I do take the references of overlaps with the other questions. Like if I take the account of earthquake risk mitigation has improved over years, and then we are taking up the account of cities have been related to more resilience development. So city is also related to resilience development to Azad. Or see the two questions, and I want to take it much more specifically. I want to read a question which is related to infilling migration, outline the challenges related to it. So one is infilling migration and challenges related to it. And the second question, which I just mentioned a while ago, that transforming cities has to be more inclusive and resilient, more required than any earlier time. So infilling migration goes with settlement urban. And urban areas are required to be more resilient. Why? Because it is having unabated influx of people, and that is the reason we have got poor quality of living. And poor quality of living with the fact that we are going to have 70% of global population living in urban areas by 2050. Be cautious with selecting the question. That is the reason in test, when you are trying to be prepared to get into examination hall, always try to rationalize your time in first having complete reading of a question paper. That is the reason in your question come answer booklet, there is a comprehensive page showing all the questions together. Don't just stand on and start writing the answer. 1 and 5 is compulsory, you don't have choice, fine. But rest of the question 2, question 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, have a very clear reading of them. Because instruction says you must attempt one question from one section. So you have a clear reading, use pencil, you always have pen in your hand, and then try to decide. I know that a part A of the question I'm very confident about, but part B is having the repetition of the question that I have selected in question 2. Are you getting my point? Are you getting my point? Yes or no? So this choice is also very important, because if you fail to make that choice, then it is automatically going to cost a lot to you. And that a lot is a full year gone. And that is the reason I have purposefully included at least 2 sets of questions, wherein the first set, where I've talked about infilling migration and urban areas resilience, there was still some content difference. But we are going back to environmentalism and sustainable developments, absolutely same question. I must not attempt both of them. Because out of 8, you have to attempt 5. You have choice in examination. Geopolitical sensitivity of Indian Ocean will not be impacting Central Asia at all. Because geopolitical sensitivity of any ocean will be impacting the buffer country. So Indian Ocean Rim Association will have the reflection on in the South Asian geopolitics, even for that matter Southeast Asian, but not on Central Asian. Any doubt that is still there with us, I'm just a mail away. You can drop in the mail, I'll be answering it. You'll be having this discussion on your portal also, you can take reference of it. I've tried to cover all the conventional as well as non-conventional question in these 3 tests. You will now be attempting 2 comprehensive tests of paper 1. So it is going to give you a further consolidation and completion of your paper 1, and then we'll swing to paper 2. But you all have noticed that for last few years, there has been the trend change in the question, where I encountered in paper 1 urban floods with example of Mumbai floods. So paper 1 also examiner can give me the specification of the question from Indian geography. So you need to be aware of that. So you have to take consideration of it as well. Okay, done from my side. I'll be seeing you for your next test discussion. Any problem, you can certainly approach me on. If you are in Delhi, you can come up to the center also. Bye-bye. See you for the next test.